Hey y'all, it's Kimmy Faith, and we have some more Tales of the Old Oak Finoke with Mr. Luther Thrift, aka the Old Swamper.
Howdy again. And we are sitting here, this is the first day of November, and they have done messed the time up again. I don't know why uh, we don't leave the time one way or the other. I I know a cousin said he'd wore the stem out on his watch for setting the time back in two. But anyway, that's human nature. We have to change things. We don't like to keep things the same. Uh, we want to talk about. You mentioned something, Chad, about the panther.
The Panther.
Oh, that's my great great granddaddy Jim Cox. He was in the 4th Georgia Cavalry, another Confederate veteran. Uh, I spent more time with old people when I was a boy than I did with the ones my age. I never learned much from the ones my age. I always figured the older people knew the things I wanted to know about. So I spent a lot of time with the elderly. And Grandpa Jim, when he first went down to the swamp, he was raised mostly at up here at Waresboro. But he was born, I think, in Tattnall County when his mama and his granddaddy William Beverly came to Ware County, and they stayed at Waresboro a little while. But then, as he got grown, they moved. He moved down across Cane Creek, and now that's the county line between Clinch and Ware County. But when Grandpa went down in the 18 late 1840s, it was still Ware. Of course, then in 1850, Clinch County was cut in, and of course that took a big hunk of Ware. But it also took a big portion of the swamp right in there, and in the edge of it there. And there's a prairie in there today called Cox's Prairie, and I don't know how much of it Grandpa Jim claimed, but he had, I think, about 2 lots of land that he paid taxes on. Now, a lot of land in Ware County, uh, people today, if you can afford a few acres, you're doing good. But back then, and on up into the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s, if you bought a lot of land down on the swamp, you bought 490 acres, more or less. Uh, but the lots were big lots, and of course, I think we went back earlier and said the General Assembly did that when they got this land from the Indians to entice the crackers to come, because it's really not, swampland's really not farmland, unless you're going to grow rice. We'll talk about the rice growers sometime. Uh, is that the one you were talking about where the snake bit the rice cutter?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, they used to have a, anyway, uh, let's get back to my story. I'll jump track here. I do that a lot. I have so much running in my head. Grandpa Jim Cox said in the 18, uh, might have been in the early 50s. But anyway, he always kept 10 to 12 hounds. Not necessarily hounds, I guess, but he probably had a few catch dogs in there. But anyway, he always kept a bunch of hounds because he was always hunting, because he had so many varmints after his cows and hogs. And the bears were bad, the wildcats were bad, but they had tigers back then. Now, when I say tiger, a lot of people, it pops in their mind today about the Bengal tiger. Well, no, that's not right. These were panthers. Uh, they were brown, most of them. Once in a while, you might have got a black one, but they were most of them brown, and they were big cats. The males get well over 100 pounds or more sometimes, and they were just right catching hogs, and especially shoats and pigs. Now, he always kept his old musket loaded with buckshot, as most country people did, because one shot you might miss. And a muzzle loader is a smoothbore weapon, and so you keep your 8 or 10 buckshot in there with a good charge of powder. Nowadays we always refer to it as black powder, but they didn't have smokeless powder, so they just said powder, gunpowder. Now, his weapon was a flintlock muzzle loader, and if some of you know how flint fires, it's got a flint screwed into the hammer, and you got a little hole in the side of the barrel, and you got a little pan there, and you got a little piece of metal that covers over it that caps the pan. It's called a frizzen, and it sticks up. It's a little piece of steel, and when you fire your musket, you cock your hammer, and then when the hammer goes forward, it strikes that piece of steel and throws it up, and a spark goes into the pan and ignites that little bit of fine powder, and it goes boop, and a spark will jump through the touch hole into the barrel, and so you get a double sound like boop boom. And so anyway, the dogs woke him up one morning about daylight, and he grabbed his musket and a torch and went out, lit him a torch from the fireplace. They always kept the coals going, because they had to use flint. Matches were kind of scarce, so it was safest and best to keep your fire going in the fireplace. Anyway, Grandpa jumped up and lit him a torch and grabbed his musket and went out to see what it was, and he always had him a few hogs that he was going to butcher right there at the house. And he got to the hog pen, and doggone, there was a big yellow tiger coming out of there. And so he lowered down on him with his old musket, and it went poof boom, and the buckshot got the tiger. So that's one of the stories I remember my granddaddy Kyle Cox telling me about his granddaddy. Now, I got so many wonderful stories from older people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s telling me about their grandparents. And I always remember that my folks and most of the swamp families down here have been here between 150 and 200 years. So I got some wonderful stories from a lot of them. But we did have some big tigers. And Obadiah Barber killed a tiger one time. All of them, boy, that was something, because they were so sly. Boy, you know, a cat's hard to catch anyway. And it's hard to run over a cat. It's a dumb cat that gets run over. And he's done lost a lot of his lives, or he wouldn't have got killed. But I saw one time. Well, he didn't kill him, but he never was the same. It stripped his barometer, and you know how cats. Most people might not know what it's called, but a cat has a little noise maker in him that old people called a barometer. And anyway, a cat, normally when a cat gets up around you, he'll go like that. Well, this one forever, he'd go. So my cousin Chester Thrift, he said, son, it stripped his barometer. He said, I don't think a doctor could help put it back. He said it's got a short in it somewhere. If you want to know about barometers, ask your local veterinarian. I'm sure he can tell you about the cat's barometer. If he can't, call me and I'll tell you. Anyway, we killed a tiger. Now, you want to get back to hogs. Oh, well, Granddaddy Cox used to tell me about the first hogs that his granddaddy carried to market. Well, he was living down there in Clinch County, And as the railroad came through about 1856, there at Glenmore, you could take livestock, drive a few cows up there, and when the train came by, they had pens there, and you could, if there was a buyer somewhere uh, on the train, they'd buy you cattle and load them up right there. So he decided he'd take some of his hogs, so he got him about a dozen hogs, and he said, well, now I can't get them in the cart. It ain't big enough. He said, I know what I'll do. I'll just drive them. Well, now, there are ways to drive hogs, but Grandpa was by himself, and I don't even think he carried an old dog, because the dog spooked the hogs. So he just took the lead hog, which he had there at the house, and she was kind of gentle, old Sal, and he got his wife's needle and thread and sewed her eyelids up, so she was blind. So then he took all of them that he was going to sell, and with needle and thread, he sewed their eyelids shut. So he got on his horse, and that old Sal followed him, and he went all the way over there to Glenmore. And then when he got there and got him in a pen, he, cut the thread off and sold his hogs. So that is kind of a unique way of taking hogs to market. But where there's a will, there's a way. And back then, they had a lot of time to think about things, so they reasoned out how to do a lot of things. They marked their hogs. One of the most memorable experiences of a hog marking, and I'd seen a lot of it done, and they kept the record up. When you established your hog mark or cow brand, you went up to the ordinary's office, which is now probate judge, at the courthouse, and you went up there and you told him, you said, now, if nobody's got this mark, this is what I want. And they'd say, well, you got a 200 bit in the left ear and a swaller fork in the right. And he looked through the book, no, ain't nobody got that, so we'll give you that mark. Well, Uncle Toomer Tatum, I love to go with him. He was, you talking about a swamper, fisherman, hunter, he loved to do it all. And Uncle Toomer bought and sold cows for a living, and he was a contract buyer for some of the slaughterhouses. But we went one day riding, me on my old horse, which his name was Dick. He was a bay horse. And I rode down, met Uncle Toomer down there at his old home place, which is at Tatumville. And he had old Strawberry saddle, and he had his 2 or 3 hounds, trail hounds, and he had one called Chain. She had a broke jaw one time, and poor old thing, she was pitiful, but he said, if he set her jaw, when she broke, she ran into a bad boar hog, and he hit her or something with his snout, and cracked the bottom jaw, and he tied it up and let her sip grits and all for a week or so, and he thought it was well, but when he took the wrapping off of her jaw, it had warped a little bit, and she's still trailing, but kind of like we're talking about that cat. Animals can get things happen to them, and the vocal cords will be all right, but it's how it comes out of the mouth. Now, Chang had her jaw was just a little bit off, but when she barked beforehand, she had a beautiful ooh, ooh, like that. But after that, it warped her bark. Instead of going ooh, she goes ooh, 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 ooh. And it just wasn't as much fun listening to her after that. A hunter that hunts with dogs, we call it, oh, that dog got a good mouth. Listen to the tongue that rascal has got. And all of them will have identifying barks. So, but poor old Chang, I'd almost cry sometimes. You could tell she was straining, trying to bark. But anyway, she bait up the hogs, and Uncle Toomer carried his hog wallet. Now sometime it'd take an old pillar case and sew one end of it up and split it in the middle and fill it full of corn. It looked like a saddlebag. A pillar saddlebag is made out of a pillar case full of corn, shell corn. And so we'd go to the area where he thought they were feeding, and she'd trail them up. And then he'd go to calling them, pig, pig, whoop, pig. And they'd all come running, the old sow and the little babies. And you'd see some of the young shoats from the last pig she had. They'd be about half grown, and you could see their mark, you know. And here come this old sow. She had 7 or 8 little pigs. They just looked like they were about a week old or something. And boy, she was a bad sow. That thing, she'd run at you. Oh, our horse would stand still, and she'd get kind of calm, and he'd throw corn all around the horse. And I said, "Uncle Tim, how you gonna mark them pigs? You can't get down there. She'll eat you up." And I sure ain't getting down there with you. He said, "I'll show you, son." He pulled a little long string out of his pocket about 7, 8 feet long, and made him a little loop in one end. And as the pigs were right there under their mama, and he kept dropping corn, he'd drop that loop down on one little pig and pulled him up, took his pocket knife out. Of course, he kept a razor sharp pocket knife. And right there on the pommel of the saddle, and the horns there too, that's the pommel is the top of the saddle and the front of the saddle. Whether it's got a horn on it or not, it's still the pommel. Anyway, he held the pig and marked the pig's ear, then he'd ease him back down, and he'd keep throwing her some corn, or I did, and he'd grab another, and after about 30 minutes, he had all 8 of them pigs marked. And ever since until I got grown or afterward, every time I think about marking hogs, that's the first thing Uncle Toomer marking hogs sitting in the saddle. And probably my most memorable hog marking. But people had all kind of marks. They'd have some like underbits would be little notches under the bottom of the ear. Upper bit would be at the top, and you'd have a full crop where they'd cut about half the ear off. Some of them have a crop and a half split, or half crop, and they'd cut a piece in the ear. They marked them all up. But anyway, if you registered at the courthouse, we'd be riding along sometime like, well, my granddaddy Cox, he'd say, you know, yonder's one of Cousin Jip's old sows. They all knew everybody's. Fleming Hendricks probably remembers more hog marks. And George, Big George, Cousin George that we talked about the other day, the real cowboy, he probably remembers most of them. But everybody knew everybody's mark. But anyway, here come in the 50s, everybody started buying automobiles, and you just couldn't keep your cows and hogs out no more. Everybody was running over them. And so they passed a law that we had to fence them up. So we fenced them all up, and that was the end of the open range around the swamp.